Hi, I'm Scott Lucas, Professor of International Relations here at the University of Birmingham. And I'm going to talk to you not just about the election that's coming up on June the 8th, but what I think is more important, what happens next. Why do I say that? Well, I know predictions have been a dangerous thing in political punditry over the past couple of years, but this one looks a near certainty. The Conservatives under Prime Minister Theresa May will have an increased majority, perhaps a very sizable majority, the largest in 20 years, after the results come in a few weeks' time. There's a weak Labour Party. While there are interesting ideas, and while there are other parties that deserve to be heard from, the Lib Dems, the Greens, local movements, that doesn't make for success at a national scale. So let's just assume that Theresa May, who called this election now, rather than, say, in 2020, because by then Britain would be in an economic recession, let's assume that she's smiling on June the 9th. What happens next, I think, is interesting in two very different but important ways. First, to carve out this space for itself as the dominant party in British politics, the Conservatives have stolen the thunder of parties not to their left but to their right, notably the UK Independence Party. And they've done so specifically on the issue of Brexit, leaving the EU. Ironically, Theresa May, who was lukewarm but still in the Remain camp during the referendum, is now firmly talking about strong and steady to defend British interest against those Europeans who continue to threaten us with their immigrants and their single market. But of course, by taking that strong line, the Conservatives may put themselves in a better position for the immediate election and in a far worse position for the next 2 years, when you have to negotiate the terms of their departure from the EU. There is no way you can have access to a single market while restricting movement of people. Absolutely no way. But because May has created blood and thunder to cover up that point, it means the EU will probably dig in its heels. The cost to Britain of leaving the EU will be high. The benefits will be very, very ephemeral, if existing at all, for the near future. And that means that in a couple of years, it is a Britain with a government which may have a strong parliamentary majority, but which will be in recession. Uncertainty about its future, isolated not only from Europe, but from much of the world. And that brings me to the second point. The idea that you simply could turn to the opposition, sort of a handing of the baton between Conservative and Labour, is long gone. It might have happened after Margaret Thatcher with Tony Blair stepping in, and then of course when Tony Blair departs, the Conservatives take over under David Cameron, and now Theresa May. But that's politics of the past. Labour is too weak, and the balance of political power is stacked against it in such a way that it will no longer command a majority in what is not necessarily the United Kingdom, but an increasingly shrinking England with Wales and Northern Ireland tacked on. So there has to be an alternative politics, not one dependent on Labour, but on progressive movements. Movements that believe in the core message that existed for decades: a strong health service, strong education, a belief in community, decent infrastructure, without going for the mantra of lower taxes, lower taxes, lower taxes every single election. Will that come from elements of the Labour Party? Probably the Greens, some Lib Dems, some people who are currently outside politics. In some ways, that'll probably be what has to happen. But that means thinking of politics in a different way after this election. Not as one in terms of knocking at doors when an election happens to come around, but one of organizing at a grassroots level. What happens at home matters, then let's take it to the streets. It'll be a long process, but probably a necessary one. Because from 2020, that strong Conservative majority will look shaky, but still will the notion of a politically and economically stable United Kingdom. And it's then that voices for decency, community, and a new sense of social security have to rise up. I'm Scott Lucas. Thanks for listening.